We are back. First show of the year. The 3 baseball Mishuganas, sometimes the 4 baseball Mishuganas. Today we have 4 of us. We have David Nemec rejoining us from last show. Hello, David.
Hello, Ralph. Hello to everyone. Peter, Al, great to be with you again.
I'm very excited to get the new year going. Alan Blumkin, how are you, sir?
Fine. I just watched the football Giants get clobbered by Green Bay.
Okay.
Well, they were winning 6-0 until they gave it away.
That was not fun to watch if you're an old New York football fan.
Old New Yorker, no.
Yeah. No. Let's talk a little New York football from back in the day. I think the most significant, if you guys will, I think
sure.
The most significant game played before the Jets played the Baltimore Colts in NFL history was the 1956 game when the Giants played the Colts.
That's 58. 1958.
Well,
58.
December of 1958.
Yeah.
56 they beat in the playoff.
I listened to that game on the radio because those days they were blacking out the home games.
You had to travel 75 miles. I drove to New Haven. I lived in Stamford, Connecticut. And I and 3 friends, we drove to New Haven so that we could watch that football game.
I was 15 years old. I couldn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I was
and there was a newspaper strike going on in New York.
But I loved the radio. We had Al DeRogatis.
Yes.
Who, I don't know if you guys knew him or had experience with him.
I saw him.
He was one.
Yeah.
Great analyst, guys.
He was terrific.
He was good. Yeah, there were a lot of good guys in those days who never.
Seriously, he was a good analyst.
And who was the play-by-play guy? Was it he?
Marty, I think it was Marty Glickman.
Marty Glickman. It was Marty Glickman, who was a close friend of mine. He and I together for a year. We used to work together at WOR Radio.
Marty Glickman, when I was a kid, was obviously you're a Jew boy. One is a Jew boy, and you grow up, and you're a sports fan. You are. You have Marty Glickman thrown at you from the time. As I say, your first experiences. Marty was an Olympian in 1936.
He certainly was.
Review that with us a little bit, Peter. You worked with him. Tell us about his situation. And can you remind us, or at least me, of the name of his teammate?
Oh, I certainly can. I certainly can. Yes, I certainly can. In fact, I had Marty on my show. I had a show, Peter Golenbock's World of Sports on WOR for about 10 months. They paid me a solid $100 a week to do the show. It was Saturday nights from 6 to 8 p.m., and it was wonderful fun. Unfortunately, I was going broke making my $100 a week. But I had Marty on, and Marty told this fabulous story that I had never, ever heard before, that he was freshman at Syracuse University when he tried out for the Olympic team in 1936. And he was one of the 8 fastest runners in America. He had amazing speed. So he was picked for the U.S. Olympic team. Along with Jesse Owens, of course, who was probably the most famous. And not only that, but Jackie Robinson's brother, Mac, was another who was on that 1936 Olympic track team. And they all got on one of the fancy schmancy boats and went to Berlin. Marty was supposed to run in one of the relays. He was supposed to He and Sam Stoller, who was the other Jewish runner on the team.
That was the name I was thinking of. Yes.
We're supposed to run, and of course, the African American runners really took it to everybody, took it to the Germans. And this was in 1936 when Adolf Hitler was proclaiming that the Aryan race was so superior. And so you had all these African Americans, proving to the world that, maybe the Aryans weren't so hotsy-totsy. And it certainly infuriated Adolf Hitler, of course. And it also infuriated the white supremacists who were rooting, in a sense, for Hitler. And one of those, actually two of those, were the coaches of the American Olympic team. He was the coach at USC. I can't remember his name right now, fortunately. But he did not want two Jews winning medals because that would further humiliate Hitler, who at the time was in the process of jailing and murdering and humiliating the Jews of Germany, and soon would be humiliating the Jews of all of Europe, putting about 8 million of them into concentration camps and killing them. And so when it came time for Marty and Sam to run, the coach came to he called a meeting of the whole team, and he said, the Germans have this secret runner that we just heard about. And so we're going to put our two fastest runners in place of Sam and Marty. And interestingly enough, Jesse Owens was the one who spoke up and said, these fellows came all the way from the United States to run. They should be allowed their opportunity. And the coach basically told Owens to shut his mouth and mind his own business. And so Marty and Sam did not get their chance to run. And Marty told me this entire story as we sat across from each other on the radio, and you could see the tears in his eyes, how hurt he was. And he proceeded to tell me how Sam Stoller, basically when he told us, he took his running shoes and threw them in the garbage can, and he never, ever, ever ran again, which you can perfectly understand. And, of course, Marty then went on to become this spectacular announcer. He not only did high school football in New York, but he also did the New York Giants football for a while. He did the New York Knicks for a while. He was just a spectacular announcer, and even a more spectacular person.
I heard Marty a lot when I was a kid because I used to get the games from Madison Square Garden on Friday night. And I have a question now. Why didn't Marty ever get the national recognition as an announcer? Why didn't he ever? He never. I don't remember him ever doing any really other than if the Giants weren't involved or a New York team wasn't involved or wasn't at the Garden. I don't remember him ever getting a gig.
The reason for that, I think, was more timing than anything else. Aside from the baseball game of the week, where they had either Pee Wee Reese or they had Dizzy Dean,
right.
There wasn't very much national coverage of much of anything back then. Until ABC
was the mecca. That was the big job. Was New York?
Yeah, New York was the big job, and Marty had it. As far as the nationalizing of all this started to come about when ABC started doing the Wide World of Sports. That was kind of the start of it.
Yes.
And from there, the fellow who started that also started Monday. They started Monday Night Football. They really.
Rune Arledge.
What about the Olympics?
Rune Arledge.
Rune Arledge is the guy. He was the guy.
No. This wasn't Avery. He might have been the Avery.
It was absolutely Rune Arledge who's the one who made for national sports coverage.
Because when the Braves Packers were winning everything in the 60s, Ray Scott did all their games because he was the local.
Yeah, right. Right. Everything was local, really, until Arledge with his Wide World of Sports, where the entire nation was watching that show. And then he started with the Monday Night Football, where the entire nation watched Monday night. You know, this was 10 years before ESPN.
Yeah, it was 1970. It was the first Monday Night.
Once ESPN came into being in 1981. Really, that's when you got, the beginning of the national programming.
Yeah. May I interrupt and ask you guys a question that I was born in 1946, and I just don't know. How common knowledge was it in the United States, say in 1936, when you mentioned Hitler was doing these things, rounding up all of us, taking us to concentration camps? Was it common knowledge on the streets of New York City?
No, it was not. And in fact, with the 36 Olympics, Hitler used that as a cover to show the world that he wasn't up to anything bad. In fact, he had a phony concentration camp for Jews, which basically showed that they were, having tea and playing and being treated wonderfully and that sort of thing. He was quite the genius. Only Donald Trump comes close to him. The genius about misdirection and false news and propaganda. This fellow Goebbels, who worked for Hitler, was an absolute genius when it came to propaganda. So it took quite a long while. They hid as much as they could in 36 the antipathy for the Jews. That Kristallnacht didn't come until after the Olympics.
Well, really, what really opened it up with two things: when the Western powers met at Avion to decide what to do about the Jews, they couldn't agree on anything, and then the Hitler-Stalin Pact opened Poland and the rest of that part of the world for invasion.
Yeah.
And and that's when when Hitler was able to go into Poland, basically unopposed, and hurl the Jews into concentration camps and the ghettos there. That's when the whole thing really started to flourish.
Right, and that wasn't until a couple of years after the 36 Olympics.
That was 1938, 39.
Yes, exactly.
Kristallnacht was November 9th, 1938.
Right.
Yeah.
Peter, you mentioned Goebbels and his propaganda. Mm-hmm. There was a great book. When I say great, I mean it was very well written, by Kurt Vonnegut. And there's always been to me some mystery of how a man can write a book about the times and not mention the Holocaust. And his book was basically about the bombing of Dresden. Mm-hmm. Do you guys have any, was it just, was it an over-exaggeration, a punishment of the people? How much did Dresden itself contribute as a war thing? Do you guys have feelings about that?
Like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But what they did, the Germans did to, the enslaved peoples, the Jews, the Slavs, and anybody else that could get their hands on, especially what they did to the Russians. The Nazis did not treat the Russian prisoners of war the way they treated the Westerns. There's a prisoner of war because the Slavs, in the Nazi scheme of things, were Untermensch.
Yeah, right.
Okay, and so when the Russians came into Germany, at the end of the war, they took their revenge in spades.
They sure did.
Yeah,
certainly did. Yes, that's exactly right.
Because
do you guys consider Dresden revenge?
I don't know. I don't know enough about it to be able to comment on that.
The problem I have with FDR is that they had ability to bomb out Auschwitz. And they never.
Well, the problem with FDR is that most of his cabinet were filled with anti-Semites.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, especially the State Department.
So everybody who had FDR's ear were basically telling him not to do anything.
Yeah.
And so he didn't. And I think of if you want to criticize FDR, because he certainly, along with Lincoln, is considered, one of those people who saved America. In this case, it was saved from the Depression. One of the faults was that he did nothing to save the Jews of Europe. In fact, when, that ship was heading to the United States.
St. Louis, yeah.
The St. Louis came to the United States. He basically told them to turn around and go back to Europe, and all those people died.
Well,
the ambassador to England at that time was Joseph Kennedy, who played a big hand in sending ships back and sending people
Well, understand
back.
that Kennedy, like Lindbergh, was another one of those America firsters. They had a real love. They had a love for the Nazis, for the Germans. Yeah, it was complicated.
Like
they made deals so that either way, who won the war, they'd be set up.
Secretary of State nominee has for the Russians.
Yeah, well, absolutely. This is so scary what's going on today. I don't particularly want to talk about it at this moment.
All right.
But it's horrendous.
Well, if you stop to think of the world situation, our ally in the world over there is Saudi Arabia, and of all the countries that to have,
that promote the Sharia, it's Saudi Arabia.
Who would you rather have? I posed this question on Facebook. Who would you rather have at the inauguration, Putin or the king of Saudi Arabia, when you stop to think about it? And is it so bad that we maybe, because of Trump's craziness and allegiance with Putin, we may be on the way to some sort of settlement with them, and we can ally ourselves with them to get ISIS and what have you? Because I think we haven't always been this at odds with Russia. They were our World War II allies, and
all I can tell you, Ralph, is we're about to find out.
We had a little period for 45 years called the Cold War that we didn't agree too much with the Russians. Yeah,
we're about to find out what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's right. It's
you and I are so concerned about everything. I for one have not heard one single peep from somebody who voted for Trump who has second thoughts. Not one.
That's interesting. I haven't either. Yeah,
not one. So
there was a woman on channel on the CNN the other night who admitted that she voted for Trump, and I think she was a university professor, and she elaborated on why she now was regretting her vote. But other than that, I haven't seen them go into the West Virginia mining towns to interview anybody and ask them if they're happy now with the way way things are going.
Wait till he's in office for a little while. And I tell people all the time, I said, don't be surprised by anything that he or his flunkies say or do.
Well,
and I expect the absolute worst, and I'm not going to be surprised by anything that they do.
That's absolutely the way to do it.
Yeah.
You've got the guy running ExxonMobil running the State Department. You got the guy running Goldman Sachs at Treasury. You've got this CEO guy who hates labor at the Labor Department. You got an Attorney General who hates gays. You've got the guy at Commerce who made billions of dollars by forcing people into bankruptcy, buying their properties, reselling the properties, making a fortune. You've got somebody who hates public education running education. You've got the wife of the guy who runs World Wrestling Entertainment at the SBA. and you got a guy who is a climate change denier at the EPA. What could go wrong?
Plus, you got the geniuses Ben Carson and Rick Perry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Peter, I'd like to thank you for passing on Keith Oberman's video that I think really sums it up. Keith says he's not a well man. He is,
not a well
country, and especially the Republicans, have to be prepared to impeach him pronto when the time comes.
Is insurance.
Well, we'll see.
Right.
Insurance. That's why they nominated him.
I mean, as you've seen over the last 6 months, when he started running and everybody predicted he would be killed by, name any one of those other 16 guys, and he ran through them like,
Grant went through Richmond.
And then against Hillary, where at 9:00 at night on voting day, you sat there staring agape at the television set, realizing that she was going to lose to this guy. I mean, nobody has been able to predict anything. And so I don't even pretend to know what's going to happen in the next 6 months. I don't have the slightest idea.
Well, given Planned Parenthood and Trump's and Pence,
but you
Ryan,
don't know.
You want to destroy Planned Parenthood. How could a woman what did this woman say when she was talking about, I voted for Trump, now I'm sorry?
Because they didn't put two and two together. They didn't. All they knew, all the people voting for Trump knew, was that he was going to make America great again. And that's all they cared about. And they also knew that they were in the heartland of this country and nobody was paying any attention to them, which is true. I mean, Hillary paid no attention to the people in the heartland. She never talked about jobs. She never talked about any of that stuff. And Trump did. And he was a lot smarter in the way he prepared things than she was. And it came back and bit her in the tush.
Yeah. I'm surprised every day.
And you will be. You're going to be surprised every day.
Done their thing. When it came down to it, they've done worse or they've done better. So, hey, let's get back to ball a little. Let's get back to ball a little bit.
Does anybody want to discuss the new baseball books that are coming out the next few months? Does anybody know of them?
No, I don't.
No, I don't have any idea.
Okay.
It's just getting harder and harder to publish them.
I know.
Well,
that depends. McFarlane publishes anything. Basically, they're coming out with a biography of Pud Galvin, and they're coming out with a history of the Detroit Wolverines, who were in the National League from 1881 to 1888.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, see, they don't pay advances.
Yeah, well,
so anybody who wants to write a book, as long as they don't want to, do it.
Their audience is limited.
Yeah. But they do keep their books in print, and they do a fair amount of publicizing of them, and they bring them all to the Sabre convention.
That's
right.
So
anybody who comes to the convention and stumbles on a bio by Pud Galvin, there it is.
At the convention, they give you 20% off, and there's no sales tax and no shipping and handling.
That sounds nice. May I ask, David and Peter, both, are you guys working on anything that you'd like to talk about?
Actually, I've been working on mostly fiction the last couple of years. Ever since I did the compendium, all the bios of 19th century baseball figures, I think I pretty much, shot my wad for the moment on baseball. And I'm, turning back to some of the early novels I did and realizing that the timing wasn't right when I did them. I really wasn't ready to do them. And now that I'm, I'm older, it's time to, but as Peter says, it's getting harder and harder to publish anything now. And fiction in particular is really a difficult area to get anything going in.
Of course, with fiction you can always you can always publish fiction with Amazon.com. Of course, people are doing that.
You can.
Oh, no fiction?
No, you can't. You can do it with Amazon.
Yeah. No,
and they
can.
do. Yeah, and there are a couple of independents, and there are a couple of, so-called vanity presses that really are pretty good to work with. One of the novels I did do recently that came out, I sold the rights to the Czech Republic, and the book that they did over there was quite good. It's doing very well.
Excellent.
So that's a fluke. That doesn't happen very often, but
right. Like selling your book to the movies.
Yeah.
Before I ask you what you have going, Peter, I want to ask you, was the novel you wrote about Mickey Mantle the only novel you've written?
Yes.
And
yes. I do have. Oh, it's fabulous. It was just so much fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I
more
knew
fun
him
than writing
so well.
nonfiction, I assume.
No, not more fun, but nonfiction can be a lot of fun too.
Right.
Fun. It was. I wanted people to know who Mickey was, and nobody ever did. And the risk, of course, was that the conservatives of the world, those who believed that Mickey should be seen as the way he had been portrayed all his life, which is this cheery, smiley hero to all. The risk was that the conservatives would jump down my neck and crucify me, which of course they did. But of course, the people who read it understood what I was doing and really appreciated it. I do believe that.
Okay, once and for all, did Mick and Joe and Joe DiMaggio, did they get along?
There is this magnificent.
Talk to so many people here.
Okay, I will give you the answer to that. I will give you the absolute answer to that. Tony Castro. Everybody, go out and buy this fabulous book by Tony Castro.
I've read it.
Called Mick and Joe D. It is stunning.
Yeah,
if he had published this 20 years ago, it would have been a New York Times bestseller. The problem is that all those
called Strangers in the Bronx, covering the same thing.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about Tony's book.
Yeah.
Tony's book, Mick and Joe D, which is a spectacular, spectacular book. And as I said, if it had been published 20 years,
book?
It was terrific. Now, what he did, and I'm going to answer your question in a circular way, but I want to tell you one of the things that was so fabulous about this book. Mickey, when he was a kid, just coming up with the Yankees, had this fabulous, fabulous girlfriend. She was a performer, a dancer, a wonderful person who he wanted to marry. The problem was that his father wanted him to marry Merlin, who was the woman he ended up marrying. And so on his deathbed in the hospital, his father said to Mickey, I want you to go home to Oklahoma. Forget the New York doll. Go home and marry the hometown girl. And quite frankly, it really ruined Mickey's life in a way. He was sort of miserable for the rest of his life, unfortunately. But what Tony Castro did is he found the New York love of Mickey's life. He found this woman and interviewed her and put her in the book. And I'll tell you what's the story that really, really struck me is that Mickey was sent in 1951 down to Kansas City for a while. He was struggling and striking out a lot, swinging at bad pitches. And this was during the period where he was dating this wonderful woman. And so he comes back from Kansas City back to the Yankees, and she says to him, for good luck, you've got this number 6. You really should wear number 7 instead.
Wow,
and
she said it.
Yes. And as a result of that, he changed his uniform number from 6 to 7. Which is just a wonderful, wonderful story that none of us would have known had Tony not interviewed that woman. And so the second half of what you were asking is, were the two of them friends? Yes, they were. Yes, they were. Tony interviewed a lot of people asking that particular question, and everybody seemed to think that Joe had extreme respect for Mickey's talent and Mickey had tremendous respect for who Joe DiMaggio was.
Oh, I was a baseball writers' dinner.
Uh-huh.
We used to put a table together from work until the prices got too expensive.
Right, right.
Mantle and Ford were on the dais, and Joe DiMaggio walked in. He was doing a card show that weekend in New York, so he came in unannounced.
Yep.
And they introduced Joe DiMaggio. Mickey Mantle took the microphone. They used to say, "Whitey." Joe walked in. She's wearing that same sport coat he wore when I came up in 1951. Because Mickey was 3 sheets already at that point. Yeah.
But he was also hilarious.
He was hilarious and profound. He was not profound, but he had profanity.
Profane. He was profane,
of course,
but hysterical.
And yet in a funny way. Gene Levy has a story about Mickey apologizing to, quote, apologizing, unquote, to a woman who he insulted at a function. And his apology, again, profane, but funny as fuck. Let's just put it that way.
Oh, no, hilarious.
Hilarious guy.
He was just terrific.
I love to entertain
if you
keep it light.
I find
think the original rift between DiMaggio and Mickey is when Ford, Martin, and Mickey were playing water guns in the clubhouse.
That's right.
And the DiMaggio clubhouse of post-war veterans, of guys used to making money in the World Series that amounted to almost as much as they made for the full season, and depending on that money, it was a different breed, just like Bouton's Yankees were a different breed of cat than than Mantle and Ford and that, and a lot of it
Billy.
was
Don't forget Billy. Billy was the worst of the three. Billy was the
worst offender, of course, and yet he was as close to DiMaggio as anybody on the team.
That's right. He called Dago. No, that's exactly right. That's true.
Right.
But if you read Tony Castro's book, you will know for certainty that there was no lasting enmity between those two guys.
Who does he use for his, to support?
I haven't read it in a while, but he supports it. It's very well supported.
One of the stories I remember about
does he use other Yankees, or does he use?
Oh yeah. He interviewed Yankees, so it's really worth reading. And like I said, if he had written it 20 years ago, it would have been a bestseller. But the problem is that nowadays, the people who remember Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle are few and far between.
As are those who played with him. I mean, that's
all of the ones who played with him are no longer with us.
Yeah, Whitey. It was before Whitey Ford.
Whitey's about the only one left.
Yeah, right. Who else could Tony have talked to? Really.
Richardson and Kubek are a lot.
But they didn't.
Richardson and Kubek came after DiMaggio.
Of course.
Yeah. They already.
I have tapes. I still have the tapes that I made of all of these people I interviewed. I've got hundreds and hundreds of tapes that I did.
Should they be in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, they should be. They should be someplace.
That's great. Those are priceless.
The trick, of course, is that I'm not going to give them away. That's the thing.
No.
I'm not giving them to anybody.
And one story I heard about Mantle when I was a kid, that he was called a communist because he had failed several military draft physicals because of his osteomyelitis.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. That's absolutely true.
Same argument they did with Nemec in Vietnam. How can he play baseball and not serve be 4F to serve in the military?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but Mickey didn't give a damn.
Well, a 19-year-old kid has a backwards of Oklahoma, and he's supposed to come here and replace one of the greatest idols ever.
Oh, yeah. Well, look, He, as you know, he was the Mick. There was nobody like him.
No, there was nobody. No.
He was.
And if anybody out there wants proof of that,
that's why his
retirement.
His cards are so expensive.
On YouTube.
His cards are so expensive.
Peter, you mentioned that you were at that game.
On the day that, yeah. Oh.
After trotting out everybody, and they were all alive at that time, from Tommy Heinrich to Bauer, all these guys, that Rizzuto and Berra, and they just applause after applause, and they just couldn't stop. And then the Mick. And DiMaggio was there that day, and it was the one day that DiMaggio could not, or anybody could not steal the spotlight.
That's right after Mickey retired.
For 28 minutes.
Retired, yeah.
Yeah, they retired, right?
Yeah.
One story about Mick that sums up the frustration, and it maybe is responsible for some of the demons that I've heard. I think I read it in your book, Peter, that he had a recurring nightmare of not being able to get into Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, he told me that.
On the door. That was your story, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's in Dynasty.
Yeah.
Dynasty.
It is the most significant story in that book, because the poor man is sweating and knocking on the door, and they're announcing, now batting number coming up, and he's just can't get in. And he was a young man. He was 34 years old when he retired. If he had done rehab,
and I think he was 30. I think he was 36, but it doesn't matter. He was young enough.
Yeah.
Young enough that had he been well, he could have played another 3 or 4 years. But his legs just couldn't do it anymore, and he had to retire.
And he was also taught it's in an era before the DH, and in a really tough time for hitters. So there wasn't, he really didn't have much point.
And surgical procedures have changed.
Right.
Even though he wasn't known for rehabbing himself and what have you, things definitely would have been different had he played in another era. And I'll also say that Stengel, when he took his first look at Mantle, said he's Cobb with power.
Mm-hmm.
So awesome.
Yeah, Billy and Mickey were Casey's kids. Billy Martin and Mickey Mantle were like Casey's children. Casey didn't have any children.
Right.
He adopted them. And the interesting thing is, basically, he let Billy do anything Billy wanted to do. But with Mickey, he knew that Mickey could be, less than hustle. And he was very, very hard on Mickey the entire time he was with him. He never gave Mickey a kind word. He always, they once asked, who was the best player on the Yankees?
Yogi.
And this was in the late 50s, early 60s.
Yogi.
And he said Joe DiMaggio. With Mickey standing next to him while he was being asked.
Stengel and
for the purpose
did not get along at all. None of the Yankees played primarily from Joe McCarthy, like Rizzuto and DiMaggio, had any use for Stengel.
Oh, well, Rizzuto hated him.
I know.
Rizzuto told me he hated him. Absolutely hated him.
Well, when
hated him.
Stengel was managing the Dodgers, I guess. I think Stengel, I know he managed the Braves, but
he managed the
Rizzuto came in for a tryout, and not only
Rizzuto tried out.
He said,
and he told Rizzuto,
"Is this the shoe boy? Is this the shoe shine boy?"
Yeah. He told him to go out and buy a shoe shine box.
Yeah,
is what he told him. And Phil just hated him from that moment on.
Right,
and of course,
an overachiever, 5'6".
Sure, but to give Phil his due,
battle.
to give him his due, he came back to the Yankees, became an All-Star. I mean, he's now in the Hall of Fame, Phil Rizzuto. So Casey and Phil are in the Hall of Fame together.
I was up in Cooperstown when Mickey Mantle passed in August of 1995 with some people.
Wow!
And I went to the from the hotel at where I was staying to the museum there, and I asked if I could see the video of Mickey's induction.
Uh-huh.
And what they told me shocked the hell out of me. Before 1982, which was the induction of Frank Robinson and Henry Aaron, among others, they had absolutely no videos of inductions. They had audio.
Is that right?
Audios. So I listened to Mantle, and Ford went in with Mantle. I listened to Ford and Mantle, and then they brought out Yogi Berra, who had gone 2 years before. Yogi couldn't wait to get off the podium. He's very,
people don't realize the Hall of Fame is not owned by Major League Baseball.
I know that, but the
Hall of Fame is owned by a woman.
Yeah,
who is the daughter of the guy who started the place.
They did not do any videos of induction ceremonies until ESPN asked them to do it because they had to fill programming time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Oh yeah,
that shocked me. I know baseball's archiving was terrible to begin with.
Oh,
that
awful.
really blew me away when I found that
out. And people would go in there. People would go in there and steal stuff. I mean, I know one guy in particular.
Oh, the library.
Who was famous for it. He went into the New York Public Library and stole stuff.
Joe Reichler?
Yeah. The same guy took his briefcase, went to the Hall of Fame, picked off letters, stole a bunch, all the valuable stuff that was in the archives before anybody knew he was doing it.
Yeah, they gave you a folder, and the folder was, with newspaper clippings, letters, and everything, and they sat you down by yourself, and it was amazing to me that they still had anything in the folders, but it's,
they really didn't.
I got to look over them.
By the time we got to it, they did.
Yeah. Who knows what was in there, in the late
well, I know what was in it because it all came up from sale. I collected baseball memorabilia, and during the early 80s, I bought a whole bunch of it. I had fabulous stuff. It ended up going to Barry Halpern. Halpern was a close friend of mine. Yeah, Barry was a close friend of mine, yeah. Yep.
Did you ever get to just sit in his basement and
often, yeah.
Oh wow!
Oh,
just
often.
To sit there.
Yeah. We traded stuff, and then what happened? What happened was I bought a house in Englewood, New Jersey, and this was after the Bronx Zoo, where I made a small fortune. And my agent was going to get me another book, and he said, be patient. And 18 months later, I still didn't have another book. So I was, behind on my mortgage. So the stupid me, I sold my autograph collection to Halper instead of selling my house. I sold it for like $65,000, and about 3 years later, it was worth about $5 million.
I think when Mantle's picture or autograph is, that's the nirvana now of collectors. People around our age, the last of the bunch. I have a lot of stuff, and I wonder what the heck is going to happen to it after I get pass on or either or unable to keep it. I've sold.
They'll throw. What do you care? Once you die, what difference does it make? They'll throw.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And the only ones you can sell anything to are people of your own age.
Oh, that's pretty well.
I
know the whole collecting business has crashed.
I know. Yeah.
The whole collecting business has crashed because everybody under the age of 40 are playing video games.
Yeah, I know
Pokemon.
that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is because I'd be afraid to buy an autograph that I didn't see signed, and I made you laugh, Peter.
You have to know what they look like, for one. And the other thing, of course, is what's happening today, and the thing that I'm reading about with great interest, is that people are becoming very adept at forging autographs. There are more Babe Ruth autographs out there being sold that are phony than they are real. And and you've got these people whose job it is to look at the autographs and determine if they're real or not, and then give their stamp of approval. And these people aren't legitimate. They're not legitimate either. So
it's like they said that quite a number of the autographed balls in the old days used to be signed by bat boys.
Well, Mickey Mantle's
autograph. When I said Pete Sheehy, somewhere there's an autograph of Pete Sheehy that Mantle forged.
Signed by Mickey Mantle, and that's a very funny comment. because
right.
Mickey, especially early, didn't particularly want to sign all the baseballs, and so
I have a pretty extensive collection of 8x10s of players from the late 40s to the early 60s. I got most of them at card shows.
Wonderful.
Because some of them I had away on life for a very long time, but those days I could do it.
And sometimes you get the interaction with players at card shows too.
Oh yeah.
Any particular interaction that you enjoyed, Alan? That where you went,
one
wow,
with my nephew, who was 9 at the time. This was 1988. Johnny Sain and Warren Spahn were doing a card show at one of the Jewish synagogues on a Sunday. It's funny, they used to do it on the churches on a Saturday and the synagogues on Sundays. And I got up to Warren Spahn and I told my nephew, who was 9 at the time, I said, this man won more games than any left-handed pitcher ever. And I said, Mr. Spahn, you were an artist on the mound. I said, I saw you pitch quite often. And he said, thank you. Nobody ever called me that before. I said, no, thank you.
Sure.
And another one I had was with Bill Mazeroski. It was a card show on 14th Street, and he was like the third or fourth biggest name there. So there was nobody there. So I talked to him for about 10 minutes. I had interviewed Dick Groat about 6 months before, and Groat said he thought Mazeroski belonged in the Hall of Fame. So I told Mazeroski, I said, buddy, Dick Groat told me he thought you belonged in the Hall of Fame, and Mazeroski said I didn't hit enough.
He said that.
Yeah, he said that to me, yeah.
Yeah.
Most of them were very, very pleasant.
Baseball players, for the most part, with about 4 or 5 exceptions, are wonderful, wonderful people.
Now, one of my friends told me a story that when Willie Mays came out with a book with the guy Einstein.
Yeah.
Charles Einstein.
Charlie Einstein.
A wonderful book.
That's a terrific book. And Charlie was a
right up there
writer.
with you, my friend. But
Charlie was
you're right up there with him. I love that book. I read that.
Willie's time.
I have tattered copies of that all over.
And he said he started to say thank Mays for all the pleasure he had given my friend, who was a big Giant fan. And Mays just scribbled his name without even looking up.
Yeah, Mays was one of those people who was just not a very nice person. And the other one,
not just that, unhappy. You told me about Monty.
Unhappy and bitter. He's still alive. He's still kicking.
Yeah.
He's still kicking.
Yeah, David. Any interactions that you can share that impressed you over the years? That
I had a really interesting incident happen to me, Ralph, when I was living in San Francisco. A friend of ours wanted to get a baseball card for her husband, and it was a very obscure middle infielder. He had one whole season with the A's in 1954. Second baseman named Spook Jacobs.
Yeah.
And we were in a card shop in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And this was actually it was with Philadelphia. But this was a big card shop, and it had all kinds of old cards and so forth. And the guy was thoughtful enough that he put it in eras. Like if you wanted to go to the 1950s, there was the whole tables of 1950s cards. So I thought, I'll spend some time with you soon. Let's go through them. And there was a guy in the shop who's an older guy, and he was going through cards himself. And he overheard our conversation, and he walked over and went through the cards, and he said, I think this is what you're looking for. And he pulled out a card of Spook Jacobs, and he gave it to me, and I looked at him, and I said, thank you very much. And then I looked at him again. By that time, he'd already turned and started to walk away. And I said, are you Spook Jacobs? He smiled, he shrugged, and he kept walking, and he walked out into the fog of San Francisco.
Fabulous.
And I don't know to say if it was or not, but how in the hell did he find the card if he didn't know it was there and if he wasn't Spook Jacobs?
Wow.
You know,
he was the second baseman. He came to the Pirates before the 1956 season for the A's, and he was the second baseman before the Pirates brought Bill Mazeroski up.
Yeah.
Well, Spook
yeah.
Jacobs had a namesake. Larry Jacobs was a campmate of mine, and he was the equipment manager of the old Philadelphia Warriors. The night that, for a long time, but the night that Wilt broke the record, Spook Jacobs and my other friend from camp, who was his assistant, Larry Millman. Larry, I know, passed away. I don't know if Spook is around. You know the sign that where Wilt had 100 points?
Yeah.
They wrote up that sign, and Larry's nickname at Kittatinny Camp, because this was back in the 50s, he was a Jacobs. We used to call him Spook Jacobs, too.
That's great.
It was one of the great nicknames. It really was one of the great
nicknames. And he
was a very, very slight.
He had shallow eyes, deep. He just looked like a spook. He was very thin on his baseball card. I remember that, and as was Larry Jacobs, who that was pretty cool, being the equipment manager for Al Addles and all those guys with Guy Rogers back when Wilt was making it. And I don't know if you know this, Peter, but Alan or David, that Alan and I are going to start a program commemorating basketball from those days.
Wonderful.
It's from Nedick's at the Garden or something like that. We're going to call it, and we're going to talk about those the days of Russell and Mikan. I think we're going to break it down in centers eras of centers that made a difference. Mikan, Wilt, to all that, and I just want to tell you, Alan, that how I'm looking forward to doing this, because sometimes you got to talk something else besides baseball.
We've got Bill Hall. We've got Bill Hall Wednesday.
Well, I tell you something, fellas. It's time to go and watch the Golden Globes.
Okay. David, thank you for joining us. Alan, the same.
I enjoyed it very much. Thanks, all of you.
I'll leave you with one thing.
Always a pleasure. Next week, I'm going to be in Washington, D.C., so we'll talk in 2 weeks.
Hey, we'll get another Jew boy to replace you for next week.
Sounds like a good idea. All right, fellas.
We'll have 3 baseball Mishuganas. How about that?
One last
Have a wonderful week.
You too.
Thank you,
one
Peter.
Last little thing.
Yes.
Spook Jacobs was one of 3 Pirate players in the 50s whose real first name was Forrest. The other two
Forrest Vandergrift.
Smokey Burgess,
Vandergrift,
relief pitcher,
his middle name.
In 1952 and 53, named Woody Maine.
Woody Maine, yeah.
Those 3 had the first name of Forrest. They asked that on some, one of the saber contests a bunch of years ago. I was the only one in the whole place who knew it.
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you, Mavens.
Okay.
We'll talk next week.
Take care.
Gesund.
David, when do you want to discuss?
And everybody out there, I'm not going to say.
Thursday's good again, Al, if that's good for you.
Okay, I'll call you to discuss what we're going to do.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Okay, take
care. Be
care.
well, everybody, and
Ralph?
Remember, it's a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. We've had Alan Blumkin, David Nemec, Peter Golenbock, and some other guy that just talks too damn much. Catch you next week, everybody.
Okay, take care, everyone.
Take care.